What is up, people? Van from the Vaniverse gaming channel here, bringing you another video on Solasta, Crown of the Magister. Today's video, we're going to dive into the different race options that you can choose from when building a character in Solasta. Now, a lot of people who've played 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons are going to know a lot of this information, but there are some subclasses that are available in Solasta that you wouldn't have in the current tabletop role-playing game. So there still might be information here that you want to check out before you start playing the game. And then we're going to kind of go into which race goes well with what classes. And then we're going to kind of talk about the pros and cons that each race has to offer. Now, I will cover the half-orc at the end because the half-orc is part of the DLC Primal Calling. And so I want to cover all the races you get with the base game first and then cover the half-orc for the people who bought the DLC and want to kind of get my thoughts on the half-orc. Now, if you haven't seen my review video yet, I've put over 200 hours in this game, so I feel like I have a pretty good idea of which race/classes I would choose from, and so hopefully this will help you get a good start on your game when you have to choose the 4 different characters that you want to play with for the entire Solasta journey. So let's get started. We're going to start with Hill Dwarves. So the one thing that I will mention is movement is going to be something that we're going to talk about for each race, and then we're going to talk about their attributes, and then on top of that, your base will get you your ancestral features. So both dwarfs, the hill and the snow, will get both of these features up here, and then down below here, the hill dwarf and snow dwarf will be different. So a lot of things that I talk about, we'll talk about on one of them, and we might even say, okay, let's talk about this for all of the races. So, for example, let's talk about movement. The hill dwarf has a movement speed of 5. Basically, every 5 feet is considered 1 movement block. So if you can go 5 blocks, that means you can go 25 feet. This is less than most of the other races that you get to choose from. So if I were to click on Half Elf, they go 6, Humans 6, Half-Orc 6. The Halflings are a small race like Dwarves, so they only go 5. And then High Elves are 6, but if you actually choose a Sylvan Elf, their movement is a 7. So just keep that in mind that under a Hill Dwarf, a 5 movement is less than the other races that are bigger. And so if you want to pick a character that is more mobile and you need to get around the battlefield into melee, a dwarf might not be the best choice for that. Now, when we talk about ability score increase, by being a dwarf, you get a 2 constitution, and by being a hill dwarf, you get a +1 to wisdom. So having a 2 constitution, a +1 to wisdom, makes them a really good choice for a druid or even a cleric. You can say that, you know, they could be a good choice for maybe some other classes, perhaps ranger, but I would say probably the go-to for a cleric for me, and even a druid as well. Now, when we get into the dwarven resilience, you know, they have saving throws against poison and poison damage. There's not a ton of things that poison you in this game. There's some spiders and other things. So nice to have, but not a huge deal if you say, hey, I'm taking a dwarf because everything's poison damage. This is going to help me a lot. That's not the case. Combat training, so they are proficient with battle axes, hand axes, and warhammers. So a lot of classes are not proficient in battle axes and warhammers. And so by picking a dwarf, it opens up a battle axe and a warhammer that you're most likely not going to get unless you pick a martial class that is proficient in every single weapon, like a fighter. So just keep that in mind. If you're interested in having proficiency in a battle axe and warhammer and you want to play a cleric, then perhaps picking a dwarf is the best way to do that. Now, the other great thing about being a dwarf is they're unaffected by heavy armor penalties. So the heavy armor, like plate mail or some of the bigger armor, they weigh more, so they slow you down. So by being a hill dwarf, you're not affected by the weight of that heavy armor. So given that you already have a slower movement speed, movement distance, then that is a really nice thing to have if you're going full heavy armor. Now, talking about the hill dwarf side, we already talked about the +1 wisdom. You get a +1 on your toughness. So for a druid that maybe wants to be a wild-shaped druid, where you're going to be up in the front, you're going to be taking a lot of hits, the Constitution is great to help with to keep your concentration going, because that's how when you concentrate on a spell and you take damage, you have to roll, and if you roll less than a 10, then unfortunately your spell concentration ends. So having a high Constitution, having additional hit points is something that might be good if you want to be a melee cleric or a melee druid. Now, dark vision is another thing we're going to talk about, similar to the movement. Dark vision is very, very important in 5th edition D&D. If you cannot see in the dark, you're going to have disadvantage on your attacks. That basically means that every time you go to attack, you're going to roll a 1d20. And with disadvantage, you're going to roll 2 1d20s. You take the lower number. So maybe you'll roll a 20 on one, which is a crit, and a 1 on the other. You have to take the 1, so you're going to miss. So having dark vision is very important, Solasta, because there is a ton of areas where you will not be able to see unless you have some kind of light via light spell or torches or something. But picking a race that has dark vision just really makes it simple to where you don't have to worry about having consistent light. Now, I will tell you that dwarves, half-elves, half-orcs, Sylvan Elves, high elves, and halflings, they all have dark vision. So the only two that don't is the island halfling does not have dark vision, and humans do not have dark vision. All the other race choices have dark vision, so keep that in mind. So that will cover the hill dwarf, and they can speak common and dwarvish. Now, if we go over to the snow dwarf, the only real difference is you get a +1 in dexterity instead of wisdom, and then you also get proficient with heavy crossbow. Now, to me, if you want to pick a ranged character, doing a heavy crossbow is fantastic. So it does 1d10 damage instead of what a longbow does is 1d8. So it does the most damage from a ranged attack. So with the +1 dexterity, picking a ranger or a rogue that is a snow dwarf, there's something to be said, or even a fighter, that you're hitting with a 1d10 instead of a 1d8. And if you go rogue and you can find ways to stay sneaking, you get your sneak attack on that, which is just absolutely fantastic. So keep that in mind. This could be a very good choice if you want to unlock heavy crossbow and you're a class that doesn't get heavy crossbow normally. Other than that, they also get a +2 to their con saving throw, so this also warrants picking a class that has to concentrate. Getting that additional +2 to con saves is really nice, because then that means you can keep concentration up. So maybe, again, something that wants to be up in the front and wants to concentrate on a spell, so maybe a fighter that has spell casting abilities, or perhaps, again, a druid. Both would be good options, even a cleric, because, having the ability to keep concentration up is really important. So that's the dwarf. Let's swap over to half-elf. Now, the half-elf, you can see, like I said earlier, they have the base movement of 30 feet, which is 6 squares. They get +2 to their charisma, and then on top of that, they get a +1 to 2 additional stats. So this is really nice if you want to pick a character that's very charisma-based. So sorcerers, a lot of their damage and everything's based on their charisma. Paladins like to have charisma. So they're the two main ones, but then what if you want to pick a character that you want to, intimidate, persuade, deception, those types of things? Having a high charisma will help get you out of fights that might actually end poorly for you. So being able to talk your way out of some certain areas in this game is very helpful. So picking a half-elf for the high charisma is nice. And then getting a +1 to 2 additional stats is really nice as well, because if you're going sorcerer, you're going to want Constitution for hit points. You're going to have Dexterity for armor class. If you're going Paladin, you're going to want some Strength, maybe some Con, that kind of thing. So it's really a great a great race if you want to pick a Paladin class or potentially a Sorcerer class would be the two that I would really strongly recommend this. Now, they also get some additional skills. So every character is proficient in a certain amount of skills. So having 2 additional skills is really nice, depending on what you want your character to be able to do. It's not as big in Solasta as it is in real D&D, but it is nice to have. They also have dark vision, which is great. They have Fey Ancestry, which makes them have saves against charm and magical sleep, but to be honest, there's really not much in this game that will charm or put you to sleep, so not a huge deal. And then they have an additional language proficiency that you don't normally get, so they can get language proficiency in something that is more appropriate for Solasta, so like Temerian, and I think there's like Turanian or Turan or whatever. There's a couple, they start with a T, that it's nice to have because a lot of the stuff that you're doing in the campaign requires you to understand that language, and then that way you don't have to know the comprehend languages spell. So that's the half-elf, pretty vanilla in the middle. So let's get down to the human. So human, same movement as a half-elf, 30 feet, 6 squares. You get a +1 to everything. So if you're looking for a character that's just very well-rounded, this might be a good race to choose, especially if you're rolling your dice. So if you choose to do rolling for your abilities instead of like doing the standard array or point buy, and you get a lot of really good numbers, say you get a couple 17s, couple 16s, having +1 to everything just makes everything great. So might be a good choice for that. They do get 1 additional language to common, so this kind of is similar to other races where they get 2 languages, but you don't have to choose whatever their racial language is. Now you will notice the one thing about humans is they do not have dark vision. So as I said earlier, unless you're picking a class that has the ability to have consistent light on them, this might be a challenge when you're trying to fight in darkness. All right, let's go down to the island halfling. So the island halfling, movement is a 5, so 25 feet instead of 30, very similar to the dwarves. Their dexterity is a +2, so all halflings are small creatures. They're much more dexterous. They get advantage on saving throws against being frightened. Now, there are a lot of creatures that frighten you in this game. So I would say having brave is nice to have, because being frightened means you can't move towards the enemy. You have disadvantage when you're attacking them, and it's not fun. So brave is a nice little thing to have. Lucky, when you roll a 1 on any attack roll, ability check, or saving throw, you get to re-roll. This is really nice so that you get to do this every time you roll a 1, which is fantastic because you think it's not a big deal, but it's also like rolling a crit. So now if you roll a 20, you get a crit. If you roll a 1, you get to re-roll again. So it's a nice little feat to have. You can move through the space of any creature that is larger size than you. So this is really great if you're blocked in somewhere and you're surrounded by 3 guys. Depending on their size, normally you can't move through them. So depending if you're fighting a large enemy, you can actually run through the enemy to get around behind it and flank it, etc. So it's nice to have, but again, there's not a lot of large creatures in here that you would be running past, and I don't know if it's worth taking a race solely because of that. Now, island halflings are more charismatic, and so again, because they have dexterity and charisma, this might be a good choice for a sorcerer or a paladin, or even a rogue. I mean, you might want to be a charismatic rogue. Maybe you want to be kind of like that swashbuckler type mentality. You're an island halfling, so you want to be a little charismatic. But again, because of the dexterity and the charisma, I think a halfling is very good for classes like rogues. Maybe even rogues are the main thing. Rangers are pretty good, that type of idea because of the 2 dexterity. But for that 1 extra charisma, who knows? Maybe it's worth doing a charismatic character as well. Languages, they get 1 additional language to common and halfling, similar to the half-elf gets an additional language, and they have advantage on dexterity checks. So there's not a ton of acrobatics checks in this game, so honestly, it's not a big deal. And also, you'll notice island halflings are similar to humans, where they're one of only 2 races that do not have dark vision, so you're going to have to figure out some kind of light spell. So keep that in mind. So now if we jump to the Marsh Halfling, they get all the stuff up top. They get addition to Constitution, which is great. So again, 2 Dexterity, 1 Con, similar to the Dwarf where it was Con and Dex. This is kind of nice because you want to choose characters that you need a little Dexterity and you want a little bit health. So Rogues, this is really great for. You can speak Common and Halfling. In marshes and ponds, atmospheres are considered swamp terrain. Okay. And then you have dark vision. So probably the best class for a Marsh Halfling would be either a Ranger or maybe a Druid, but most likely it's going to be a Ranger or a Rogue. All right, so let's talk about elves. So the High Elf, you get movement is a 6, so just like all the other normal humanoid races, not the small races. 2 to dexterity being an elf, so again, that just promotes them being very good at picking a class that is a rogue or ranger or something that uses dexterity for their attack bonuses and attack damage. They have saving throws against charm, very similar to half elf. They have dark vision, great. They're proficient in perception, which is kind of nice because there are a lot of areas where perception helps you detect hidden things, not, see things that are stealthy, and etc. So it's a nice skill to have proficiency in. And then another great thing is they only take 4 hours to rest instead of 8. In real D&D, that's kind of nice. In this game, it's not really a big deal unless you want a whole party of elves where you're only resting for 4 hours for a long rest. That's kind of nice. Otherwise, it's not really a big benefit. The other thing to notice is they get +1 to their intelligence by being a high elf. So having a +2 intelligence makes them a very good choice for any of the caster type classes. So that would be basically a wizard, maybe a fighter that uses intelligence for their casting, maybe a rogue that uses intelligence for their casting. But for the most part, wizards, I almost always pick a half-elf when I go wizard. So just keep that in mind. If you want to go the wizard class, this might be the best race to choose from. You also get proficiency with long swords, short bows, short swords, and long bows. So again, 2 at dexterity, 1 intelligence. Very good. Elves have always been a very good choice for the bow type users. And rogues are a very good choice because they usually use light weapons that use dexterity, such as daggers, short swords, etc. They also get 1 wizard cantrip using intelligence as their spell casting ability. Now I'm going to do a video on all spells, but getting a cantrip is kind of nice, especially if you go the wizard route or maybe even a sorcerer route or some kind of caster that relies on their cantrips as like their basic attack. So having an extra cantrip allows you to take a light spell, take a damage cantrip, take another cantrip. So having an additional cantrip can't hurt if you're a caster. And even if you're a rogue or something and they're immune to, say they have resistance on your damage because you don't have a magic weapon, maybe throwing a cantrip at them isn't a bad idea. So very nice to have that extra cantrip, especially if you're a caster. And then again, similar to the half-elf and I believe the Highland Halfling, you get to choose an additional language. Now we'll get into the Sylvan Elf. So very much so an elf, +1 wisdom, so ranger, again, fantastic. Druid, fantastic. Could even go cleric, given they get 2 dexterity and 1 to wisdom, all very good options. Proficient in longbows, so definitely if you want to go ranger or you want to go a range rogue, it's a great race to choose from. Proficient in survival and athletic skills, advantage on survival when hunting. So in this game, as you're traveling between the different areas, you need to gather food. So if you don't pick a class that can create food, then you could end up getting fatigued on your journey in between if you don't have a good survival. And so that could allow you to get attacked more when you're sleeping and get jumped. So kind of nice to have for the game of Solasta. And then you really just get to talk to halflings, dwarfs, elves, and common, but no special language of your choice, which isn't a big deal because you can always get that with background options and class options, etc. So those cover all the races up until this point, except for the half-orc. So I'm going to pause there and just kind of say the other benefit of the Sylvan is the extra movement. So they get to go 35 feet instead of 30. So again, great choice for maybe a melee ranger or even a ranged ranger because you can move away, you can get range on things, stay out of melee. And then also for rogues, so it helps you get in, get your backstab in, and get the heck out kind of idea. Now, with that being said, a couple keynotes that I think I covered is, dark vision's really big in this game. Having dark vision can really make or break you. So choosing all your races that your characters have dark vision is very nice, but don't let that pigeonhole you to not choose human or island halfling if you like to. Just make sure you pick up a cantrip on one of your characters that allows them to cast light on that character, and then they just have light all the time. So that's a good thing there. Movement's very big. We talked about that. Other than that, I think we covered all the real perks of each class. of each race, which makes them super nice or better or worse, depending on which class you want to be. So finally, let's get into the half-orc. Now, the half-orc came out with the DLC. I don't think I've ever played a half-orc if I wasn't a barbarian, so the barbarian class came out with this DLC. So picking a half-orc barbarian just feels great. But let's just kind of talk about this race. So you get a base 6 movement because they're considered a medium-sized humanoid. You get +2 to your strength, +1 to your constitution, which is why they're the perfect barbarian, because of the high strength and high constitution. They're great for a fighter class. They're great for a melee class that wants to use strength instead of dexterity, because of the constitution for their hit points and the strength for their damage. Just a melee beefy class. They have dark vision, great. You gain proficiency in intimidation, which is kind of nice. So in some of the conversations, if you intimidate someone, you have a better chance of beating and getting the information or finding out something more. And then two of the best things about picking a half-orc are the relentless endurance and the savage attacks. So relentless endurance, if you go down to 0 hit points, you actually only drop to 1 hit point instead. You can only benefit from this once every long rest, but if you're kind of the upfront tank and you're sucking up all the damage, taking a hit that would knock you out and not actually getting knocked out and staying alive will give your healers time to get you healed, which is super important. So it's really nice to have, because once your barbarian goes down, if you have a bunch of, squishies, then they're all going to flock on them, and that's not good. And then savage attacks is great. When you score a critical hit with a melee weapon, you can re-roll weapons damage. This is really nice because most times with a half-orc, you're using a d12. And so if you roll a 1d12, you get to roll 2d12. So at the end of the day, you're getting more damage because of that savage attacker. So super great to have. Now, is it worth picking up the DLC and paying the $10 in order to unlock this race? Probably not, but it is probably worth it to unlock the Druid class or even the Barbarian class, because they're both really fun classes. I really prefer the Druid and Solasta over the Cleric because of some of the options they have to offer, which we'll get into in the class section, and then we can kind of talk about that. So hopefully this video kind of gives you a really good idea of the different race choices, what are some of the pros and cons of each race, and some of the suggestions of good classes to choose and why. If you like this video, just give it a like. If you want to see all my videos on Solasta, make sure you subscribe to my channel. And then just stay tuned for the next video, which is probably going to be on classes, and then we'll talk about spells and feats and backgrounds and all of that. This is Van from the Vaniverse Gaming channel. Thanks for watching. Cheers, and peace out.